My name is Ruben Aronson, and I'll be discussing our work on inferring goals with gaze during teleoperated manipulation that was done with Nadia Al-Mutlaq and Professor Henning Edmony at the HARP lab at Carnegie Mellon University. Robot teleoperation helps people to accomplish all sorts of tasks. However, teleoperation is difficult due to factors such as the high dimensionality of manipulation problems and non-intuitive kinematics. To make this problem easier, we can use shared control. In this system, the robot predicts the user's goal, then combines the user input with an autonomously generated signal to accomplish the goal. To be successful, shared control systems must accurately predict the user's goal. Typically, these systems infer the goal from the user's joystick commands. In this work, we consider an alternate signal source, eye gaze. People's gaze during manipulation is highly relevant to the tasks they are performing. While systems have found success with gaze-based interfaces, we consider natural gaze, where people look when they're not being deliberate. During teleoperation, people reveal their intentions through their gaze as they look at important parts of the task. People's gaze is highly task relevant, and it's an available signal, since people produce it automatically. Furthermore, it promises to be complementary to the joystick signal, as it comes from a different source and has different temporal dynamics. However, the signal is noisy, contains minimal context, and is inconsistent between people. In this work, we introduce a hidden Markov model-based approach to identify people's goals from their eye gaze behavior. We compare this method to both the joystick-based goal prediction and with an alternate gaze strategy that does not consider the order in which gaze occurs. We find that gaze generally outperforms the joystick, and the sequential gaze method outperforms the aggregate one. Gaze also gives a prediction earlier than the joystick method does. In addition, we find that gaze-based prediction is highly bimodal, in contrast to the simpler distribution of joystick predictions. Let us formalize the prediction problem. We assume that a person is teleoperating a robot to accomplish one of a small pre-specified number of goals. The problem then becomes, given a sequence of gaze information, to determine a probability distribution P of G over the goals that best matches the user's intention. This distribution is what we intend to infer using gaze behavior. To apply gaze to this problem, we must first understand the gaze signal. Gaze is typically captured by either a stationary or a head-mounted eye tracking device, which reports the pixel location of the user's gaze target on an egocentric camera using a prior calibration process. Using this signal has several challenges, including calibration error and dropout such as blinks, and the lack of context within the raw pixel location. To account for these challenges, we perform some gaze preprocessing steps. First, we recall that gaze physiology indicates that people's gaze is divided into fixations, extended periods in which they focus on a single object, separated by saccades, which are rapid motion between objects. We begin by segmenting the gaze data into individual fixations and label them jointly using standard clustering algorithms. By analyzing fixations, we can ease the evaluation process. Next, we incorporate context by selecting a set of task-relevant objects in the scene. We map each gaze fixation to one of these objects to construct a sequence of object labels and durations representing the gaze signal. To derive goal probabilities from this labeled gaze sequence, we use hidden Markov models to represent the sequence attached to a specific goal. We start with the labeled sequence of fixations given above. We select all the sequences corresponding to each goal and train an HMM on those sequences. Given a new sequence then, we can obtain goal probabilities by comparing how likely the observed sequence is to be emitted by each HMM. This method incorporates temporal context into the gaze analysis. To evaluate this method, the sequential gaze method, we compare it to two other methods for goal prediction. To analyze the usefulness of the temporal context, we consider an aggregate gaze benchmark, in which the goal is predicted by computing the number of fixations directed towards each goal object. In addition, we consider a joystick-based prediction strategy based on inverse reinforcement learning. In this method, the user's joystick command is estimated to arise from them noisily optimizing a Markov decision process, and their command is drawn from a distribution centered around the optimal action conditioned on the goal. For evaluation, we use the harmonic data set a collection of trials in which users operated a robot to spear one of 3 objects on the table while their eye gaze data was recorded. After restricting the data to only successful unassisted trials, we used 64 trials with an average of 60 fixations per trial. To compute fixation labels, we selected the goal objects and each joint of the robot as potential fixation locations. First, we consider the performance of each method. We find that sequential gaze outperforms other methods in accuracy of final prediction and the mean and medians of the probability of the correct goal at the end of the trial. To further investigate these results, we consider how each prediction evolves over the course of the trial. This plot shows the distribution of probabilities assigned to the correct goal by each method during the trial, normalized by trial duration. We see that while the joystick-based prediction accuracy rises gradually through the trial, both gaze methods perform differently. The gaze prediction is highly bimodal, as gaze starts neutral and soon jumps to either a correct or incorrect prediction as goal-directed fixations occur. This explains the discrepancy between median and mean prediction accuracy. We also consider how quickly the prediction converges on the correct goal. To eliminate asymmetric starting conditions, we consider only trials for which the prediction at the start was incorrect. This plot shows the fraction of trials that have converged to the correct goal per method over the course of the trial, where convergence means that the correct goal is predicted from that time through to the end of the trial. We see that gaze, especially sequential gaze, converges quickly, with about half of trials converging in the first 10% of the trial. In contrast, the joystick seems to take longer to converge, though the small number of selected trials mean more investigation is needed. However, gaze is not an ideal signal. In about 10% of the trials, participants exhibited no goal-directed gaze at all, as people used memory and peripheral vision for localization instead. In these cases, the methods here struggle to make accurate goal predictions. Even worse, people's gaze towards objects cannot generally indicate the role of the object in the task. While objects we considered here were all goals, we speculate that gaze for obstacle avoidance would look similar. Therefore, we compare how the performance of the sequential gaze method and the joystick method are related. We find that the trials in which gaze and joystick give correct predictions are not correlated. This result suggests that gaze and joystick give complementary information and that methods to combine them are potentially useful. In this work, we presented an HMM-based method for predicting a user's goal from their natural gaze behavior while teleoperating a robot. We find that while gaze-based methods perform well on average and can even outperform a joystick-based benchmark, its performance is somewhat unreliable. Therefore, we propose that the gaze and joystick methods give complementary signals for intention prediction. We look forward to further exploring the usefulness of gaze in a user study in which gaze-based prediction is used for assistance. Thank you for listening, and please reach out if you have any questions or would like to discuss further.